Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast. I'm your host, Oliver McBride. Today I have the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Charlie McConalogue, TD, with us, and we will be talking about the crisis in the fishing industry. So welcome, Minister, to the Fishing Daily podcast.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks for the invitation. Good to be on with you.
So we'll kick off today and we'll talk about the virtual town halls. So you recently undertook a series of 5 virtual town halls right around the coast of the country. And how did you find the experience?
Yeah, I found it very useful and very helpful. And I've been Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine now for about 7 months or so, just over 7 months. And listen, I've worked, obviously it's been a challenging 7 months and momentous one for the fishing and the marine sector with the challenges there, particularly with the Brexit challenge. But right throughout that time, I've been working very closely with fishery representatives and engaging with fishers and all in the industry as well. But there wasn't the same opportunity naturally with the COVID pandemic and the backdrop to be able to be on piers and harbours and engage with as many as you would like to in the way you normally would, and hopefully in the way we will be able to in the months ahead as well. So that's why I undertook the initiative of hosting a series of virtual coastal town hall meetings covering the whole coast of Ireland and engaging with fishers and with those working in processing, those working in support industries or in the marine sector, and also those, living and working in coastal areas and coastal communities for whom, the fishing and the marine resource is really important and healthy coastal communities are really important. So I found it a really, really good exercise, a tremendous engagement in all the meetings that we had. It was an opportunity for me to update, coastal communities and fishers and those working in the sector on the challenges that are there and where we're at and what's happening. But primarily an issue for everyone to feed back to me and to make their views clear and to make their comments, to ask questions. And the way the meetings went, it was very much discursive and in nature, and people making their contribution and discussion around that. And absolutely everyone had their opportunity to have their say and indeed to come back in on any points they wanted to come back in on as well. So I found it very useful and very constructive, and I hope that those working in the fishing community and the marine sector in our coastal areas found it useful and constructive as well. And I believe communication is important. And look, we've had lots of challenges there. We're actually all working to the same agenda to try and promote and do the absolute best by our fishing sector and to maximise the potential of our marine resource. And the more communication, engagement and discussion we have around that, the better. And I thought the virtual town halls were really positive in that regard, and something that there's a role for into the future too. And as we've all seen over the last number of months, the opportunity for engagement online can have a massive role to play, and it can be very effective too. Well, we're all looking forward now in the next number of weeks to getting back to the ways we always did business. I've no doubt that these forums will play a big part in our life going forward too.
Town hall was do you think it's a progressive step in meeting fishermen, or do you still think that getting out and meeting people on the ground is the best way forward?
I think, listen, it was really helpful, and obviously it's much. We all prefer to be on the ground and to be at piers and harbours and meeting people in factories and that as well, and look forward to doing that. But certainly in the absence of being able to do that over the last period of time with the pandemic restrictions, it was great to be able to do the virtual town halls, and I thought they were very useful all around.
The mood at the town halls seemed to have a lot of frustration about what's happening at the moment. One of the areas that has been a big bone of contention is the area in regards to the loss of the control plan. Our SFPA is supposed to be creating a new plan to be submitted to the Commission. Is there any word on the progress of that plan, or is there plans in the pipeline? Do you know about any of that?
Yeah, I suppose, listen, there was certainly, it's reflected in all of the coastal town halls that I had. They all reflected the challenging time that we're in. Because, although I've been 7 months as minister, it's coincided with some of the biggest challenges that the sector's had to face in a long time, and like over the last year, the pandemic has impacted on fisheries significantly, as it did in other parts of the economy. But the fishery community and sector continue to work throughout that. And there was impacts on prices and logistical challenges, market challenges. And then, of course, the massive threat to the sector posed by Brexit, the uncertainty in advance of the agreement running up to Christmas Eve, and also the impact as a result of the agreement in terms of the loss of quota and the challenge around that emerged from that. So, there's been challenges, significant challenges impacting on fishers' livelihoods and the sector's well-being and as a whole. And also then in recent times as well, the revocation of the control plan by the EU Commission, which has added an additional layer of very significant challenge to our fishery sector, and particularly in the short term in relation to our whitefish sector in particular, and very significant inconvenience from a practical point of view in terms of being able to weigh fish and the capacity to be able to weigh them in factories, and particularly in cases where the factories are away from the pier. And that's without a doubt created a significant challenge and practical difficulties. It did result from a decision that the Commission made, and it was the EU Commission made this decision. It was in the back of an administrative inquiry that they'd carried out, and as a result of that, administrative inquiry into the control plan, particularly in relation to the pelagic sector, they indicated that they didn't have confidence that our control plan was robust enough, and therefore revoked it. Now that has posed a significant challenge for the sector. It's posed a significant challenge for the SFPA as well. And these matters are operationally, as you know, Oliver, legally within the remit of the SFPA, and that the Minister, from a policy point of view and an overall fisheries policy point of view, is separate from the SFPA, and the SFPA then have to deal with the operational matters and issues such as control plan, working with the EU Commission as the overall control authority under the Common Fisheries Policy. So they've had to respond to the revocation of that control plan as well, as have had fishermen and women, and that has been challenging. And they continue to liaise closely now to see what the impact is, how the practical implications of that, how that can be addressed, and then ultimately as well, I know the SFPA updated the Oireachtas Agriculture and Marine Committee recently in relation to the pathway towards getting a new control plan in place and the steps involved in that. And listen, that's directly the role of the SFPA to work with the sector on that, and certainly whenever there's a control plan proposed, then anyway I can be helpful at European level in terms of that within my capacity I would be, but it's legally a matter for the SFPA to take that process forward.
But can you understand the fishing industry's frustrations? Like, the SFPA submitted evidence that was gathered and given to the Commission. The Commission has come up with a decision that all the Irish fishing industry is guilty and has to be punished, when the report that was submitted was based on what the SFPA believed was happening in the pelagic sector. Now we have whitefish, which is going to be affected badly. We have non-quota species such as crabs that has to be weighed and accounted for, and it's an overall punishment based on a report that was taken from the pelagic sector and not from the overall sector.
I do certainly. I certainly do, absolutely, and I know on a practical basis what it means for fishers and indeed for co-ops and those working in the sector and processors in terms of the challenge that's arisen as a result of it. We only had one control plan which covered our entire, which covered all sectors of the fisheries sector, as a result, and that's in place since 2012. And as a result of the Commission, the administrative inquiry, which you're right, was into the pelagic sector in particular. But the outcome and the decision they published on the back of that and revoking the control plan was that, as a result of that, the EU Commission didn't have confidence that our control plan and weighing systems were robust enough to remove the risk of non-compliance, and therefore they revoked that control plan. And that's had an impact on all sectors, and the immediate impact has been on the whitefish sector, because of the fact that the pelagic sector at this time of year it's a quiet time of year for it. So that is a real challenge, and that's undoubtedly a real source of frustration. I fully understand that, Oliver, and I know that the co-ops and fisher representatives are engaging closely with SFPA in terms of the practical implications of the revocation of that control plan, and in particular the derogation contained within it to allow for in-factory weighing. And I know then the SFPA have outlined in relation to their, for example, to the Raptors Committee last week, the process involved in working towards getting a new control plan back in place, and the challenges around that, but how they will be going about that.
So who developed the original control plan? Was that developed by the SFPA, or did that come from the EU Commission? Who came up with it in the first place?
So the control plan would be developed by the SFPA, working in conjunction with the Commission, and then would ultimately be approved by the EU Commission then.
But the original one, the original of the plan that has now been revoked, that was developed by the SFPA.
That's my understanding, Oliver. Yeah, that's my understanding.
And it seemed to be very short-sighted, and the fact that we got that, it didn't split the sectors up into different areas. It treated the whole fishing industry as one whole. And, should the SFPA now be looking at a control plan that is specifically designed for every individual sector, rather than trying to submit one control plan that covers all of them?
Well, I suppose legally that's an operational decision for the SFPA, working with the Commission, and particularly as well working with fisher representative organisations and stakeholders. So legally, it's not a space I can get into, Oliver, because the fisheries and the Maritime Acts preclude any involvement by the minister legally in operational decisions such as that. So I know I have heard that that proposal you're putting forward there made by within the industry in recent times, since the revocation of the control plan, and I've no doubt that's a conversation that they will have with the SFPA as well in terms of how to go forward. But it's a matter that's legally actually separate from me. If I was to be involved in any of the operational matters, it'd actually be in breach of the law. So but it is something that the SFPA as the having the legal responsibility will, I know, engage with fishing representatives strongly on, and then set the way forward then coming out of that.
Well, the SFPA has come in for very heavy criticism in the town halls, and I don't think any of the fishermen said that they were competent. Is yourself or the government, do you have maybe any intention of going back and examining the legislation around the SFPA? You think maybe that this needs to be something that has to be addressed? I know you're independent of the workings of the SFPA, but still no, it's the government who has control of the legislation. Is it maybe something that has to go back, be taken back and to be examined, and somewhere along the line it's not working right? Do you think that when something's broken, as a minister, this is your opportunity to fix it? So
you're absolutely right in the policy matters, and indeed the law is a matter for myself as minister and for the government and the Oireachtas, and the legislation that's in place creates a very clear separation of responsibilities between operational matters, which are the role of the SFPA, and the minister, which deals with policy matters. Listen, you're right. There was significant criticism at a number of the meetings of the SFPA, but I think it's important to recognise that they have a very challenging role to carry out, and it's a really important role too. The fisheries sector is a very regulated sector. The common fisheries policy is very heavy in regulation. All of our species have specific quotas. There's very significant terms and conditions as well, in relation to how fish are caught, and bycatches, etc., and significant regulation that goes with that under the common fisheries policy. And that's not just the case in ourselves in our own waters, it's the case for other member states as well. And in order to then oversee and implement those regulations, there has to be a regulatory body and a body that does enforce and oversee those regulations. And that's the role and the space then that the SFPA have to perform and carry out. And that is a challenging job, and a difficult one. And I know there does be tension there with the sector, and that's often reflected. And I think it's important that, we do work in every way we can to ensure that there's as good and as strong and as a working relationship as possible in relation to that. But it's a challenging role to carry out, and they have had, as the SFPA have had, organizational challenges as well. And there has been significant measures taken to try and address those and work through those. So, for example, the PricewaterhouseCoopers report was conducted and looked at the organisation and had reported on many various recommendations for implementation. And there's an advisory committee that's been set up that's working very closely with the SFPA too, in terms of implementing those. And the SFPA management are very committed to actually implementing the recommendations within that PricewaterhouseCoopers report. Within the programme for government, there's a clear commitment and programme for government commitment to actually working to have that PwC report implemented. And that's really the space we're in at the moment. And every effort and assistance and resource that can be allocated to work through those and support that work would be important. And I think it's important to note that the SFPA are working really hard in terms of making progress in terms of implementing those recommendations too. They have a lot of work left to do in that. It's important as Minister that I support them in that, and the government supports them to do that. It's important that they are embracing that challenge, which they are, and looking to ensure that the SFPA is as an effective and highly performing organisation as it possibly can be. So there is a lot of work ongoing in relation to that, and the SFPA are very much committed to that work as well.
What happens if the SFPA doesn't fully implement these changes? What can be done to force them to change, or,
well,
where can you take this?
I think it's really important to recognise that they have fully embraced it, they have fully accepted the report and the recommendations, and they are working through it, and the advisory committee are working very strongly with them to do that as well. So, that's an important point to make here. And let's work that through and work in terms of getting those recommendations implemented. They have shown a very strong appetite to actually bring those forward. They've appointed somebody internally as well, a transformation or director of transformation as well to drive that process. So I think it has been embraced by them, and they are leading that project in every way they can to try and ensure that it's implemented.
Okay. No, SFPA is a very, very interesting subject. It's one of those bodies that is independent, but from the outside, it doesn't look like it's policed by any other regulator or anything out there. And I think a lot of the fishing community finds it frustrating that there is, I know we can understand the need for the independence, but it does seem to treat fishermen on a different level to say like what other policing bodies do towards like the general public. Fishermen feel that they're criminals before they've even been proven innocent or guilty. You understand that feeling. That's what frustration's about.
Yeah, I understand it. Like, it's so regulated, like, and everything everything has to be reported and accounted for. And listen, that's a constant pressure for fishermen, and a constant source of frustration for fishermen as well. Like, I fully understand that's a really challenging environment to operate in. where the mistakes are made, and there's breaches of that there can be repercussions. That is stressful and that's challenging. But I suppose that's the nature of the common fisheries policy, and the nature of the fact that it is so regulated that there's quotas for every species, and then that's very much overseen by the scientific advice around the health of various stocks. And then ultimately, I suppose there isn't any way of getting away from the fact that it is important at each member state level that there is oversight of those regulations, and it's also important that it's consistent in each member state, and that's really important too, because if those controls are lax in some other member states, or if there are weaknesses in them, then it can allow a small number to exploit those weaknesses and not to comply with the regulations. And obviously, if you have a situation where a small number aren't complying, that's very corrosive then for the industry as a whole. So by its nature, it does require strong regulation in order to prevent overfishing, or the common fisheries policy regulations not be complied with. And I absolutely understand and feel the frustration and the challenge and the stress that can be for fishers on a daily basis. And it's an unfortunate aspect of, it's a reality of the nature of such a regulated sector.
Well, moving on to penalty points, from the SFPA to the penalty points. Another huge area of frustration for the fishermen. How far along is the new bill for the penalty points for the masters of fishing vessels, and that how will we be seeing it sometime in the near future?
Yeah, it's progressed promptly, and it's just finished pre-legislative scrutiny by the Oireachtas Agriculture Committee and Marine Committee there in the last. Well, I think that they've held their last hearing in the last week or two. I was in with them for a further 2 hours there the week before last, and I think that was the last meeting that they intended to do on it. And then they were going to make the report in terms of their pre-legislative scrutiny report to myself. And then the next step then, Oliver, would be introducing the legislation to the Dáil and to the Seanad, and having it pass through the Dáil and the Seanad. And I suppose that there is an urgency around introducing the Masters penalty point system to go alongside the license holders penalty point system, which is currently in place, because of the fact that there's enforcement proceedings that have been taken against Ireland as a member state by the EU Commission. And also because of the fact that we've had €26 million of funding suspended as well by the European Commission, because of the fact that we haven't introduced the system. And I want to thank the members of across the various parties, all the members of the Oireachtas Agriculture and Marine Committee, for understanding the importance around the urgency of this bill, and for facilitating at very short notice the hearings for it, and bringing in the various stakeholders, and frankly the producer organisations and fisher representatives for coming before the committee as well to give their views on it. And look forward now to the committee members' report coming. But I do very much thank them for prioritising this bill and for giving it the time necessary to do pre-legislative scrutiny. I suppose just to touch on it overall, going back in 2012, there was an EU decision made that all member states, coastal member states, should introduce a penalty point system for both license holders and a penalty point system for masters of ships. We're the only member state now, EU member state, that hasn't actually put in both those penalty point systems, and every other member state has proceeded to do that. It has been a contested process. The first statutory instrument introduced to bring in penalty points for license holders was in 2014. That was then challenged in court on a number of matters. The court upheld the statutory instrument on almost all of the items that it was contested on, except for one, and therefore that statutory instrument fell. There was then a new statutory instrument introduced, I think it was in 2017, by previous Minister McBride, and that was then the fishing industry representatives had raised significant concerns about that, and suggested a number of amendments. I would have been in opposition at that time, and my party was in opposition, and we would have taken on board the concerns and of the sector and engaged strongly with them and sought for those amendments to be considered. That statutory instrument was voted down in the Dáil on the basis that those amendments needed to be given further consideration, and then there was that led to a further delay. But there was lots of legal advice taken in that period of time as well in relation to the potential for any of those amendments to be incorporated into the SI, while ensuring that the penalty point system that would result would bring us into compliance with our obligations to introduce an effective system. And then on the back of all that legal advice, then the Taoiseach, having considered the matter when he was acting Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, introduced the SI for the penalty point system for licence holders. And that did incorporate some of the amendments, a small number of the amendments that had been suggested. And the amendments that weren't incorporated were not incorporated on the basis that legally, the legal advice was very clear that it wasn't possible to incorporate them into the SI and into the penalty point system while introducing a penalty point system that actually would ensure we were compliant with our obligations under the EU regulations. So I know that was something that there was significant concern expressed and opposition expressed from the fishing sector about as well. And immediately upon my appointment as minister, I would have met with all of the fishing representative organisations to again discuss this and tease out this matter. And I would have again reviewed all the legal advice myself around this in great detail, and doubly satisfied myself as well as to the fact that all of the amendments had been fully considered and any that could be incorporated were incorporated, and that there wasn't any further wriggle room on this matter. And of course that that we had to absolutely much later than we should have, we had to move to ensure we introduced these systems, because we can't have a situation where we're being taken to court at European level for non-compliance and the implications of that, or indeed we can't have a situation where we lose out significantly on national funding, or the taxpayer significantly loses out because of funding being suspended by Europe as a result of us not being the only member state not to have complied with this. I suppose that the three key tests that the penalty point system had to meet was the thresholds that to meet was that there had to be a penalty point system introduced which was effective, persuasive, dissuasive and proportionate, and that was the three thresholds that had been made. And in terms of the amendments that were considered, they had to be assessed against that benchmark as well. So listen, I suppose there's very few things that have got the level of consideration and detail and indeed engagement on that this has over the last number of years, to the extent that it's now 9 years after the regulation was initially introduced that the license holder penalty point system is in place, and we still don't have the master's penalty point system in place. So that's why now I'm moving forward promptly as well with the master's legislation, because I want to be in a situation where we get that money back from Europe that we have already spent and that is currently suspended, and also where we avoid a situation where the next step that the European Commission will be taking will be bringing us to court, the European Court of Justice for non-compliance. They've already moved to take to take a reasoned opinion proceeding against us, which is the final step before an actual court proceeding. So coming out of that, I hope over the next number of weeks and month or two to progress the master's penalty points legislation through the Dáil and through the Seanad, and to have that system in place then too, and then that will have finally hopefully resolve the issue in terms of the enforcement proceedings that are taken against us. But I want to emphasize the fact that in terms of the engagement, in terms of the consideration of the various issues that have been raised, they have been looked at inside out, upside down, and over and back. And there has been, ultimately we're in a situation now where we have to move forward, and it's important we do have these in place. They should have been in place long ago. and we will have them in place now. And as Minister, I hope to progress that work in the next number of weeks.
And where was the problem? Do you think every other European country was able to introduce them, and we weren't able to introduce them as quickly? We've had so many challenges. Was there like a study done by the department on how the other countries implemented their penalty point system, or is it something to do with the fact that we are a nation that has a common law system, whereas a lot of the European countries have a codified law system? Where was the problem? Was there a study done, or was it just, could this have been done quicker? Or is there any difference between the penalty points being introduced in Spain and France and the way it's been introduced here? There seems to be confusion somewhere along there.
Yeah, we do have a different system from other European countries, in that we have a common law system as opposed to the administrative law system. So we're a bit different in that regard. But I suppose, listen, it has been really contested. It has been quite contested over a long number of years in terms of getting agreement on the system that would come into place. And as I say, back in 2014, there was a statutory instrument for license holder penalty points, but that was then challenged in court, and then that delayed things, and there was a significant amount of time involved in that. And then once that SA fell, there was a new SA introduced, but that was, politically there was challenges and contested too. And my party would have, suggested a number of amendments for further consideration around that, and the industry would have. But then those were fully considered and looked at, and we're at a situation, where too much time has passed in this. We're in a situation which is not in any way helpful to us in terms of having funding suspended and having enforcement proceedings taken against us. It also means, whenever you get to the stage where you have a reasoned opinion taken against you by the European Commission, their spotlight is very much on you at that stage, and you're in a situation where enforcement proceedings are taken against you, so you do have to bring in a system which stands up, passes muster, and which meets the test of complying with the regulation. Because the last thing we need now is, through a lack of will or not stepping up to the mark, bringing in a point system that actually still doesn't make us compliant and actually ends up with us losing funding potentially, or having further enforcement proceedings taken against us. So, but listen, I have engaged and consulted with this industry representatives and fisher representatives in every way as possible. Full consideration has been given to all of the potential amendments that have been suggested. They've been looked at in great detail, and I'm absolutely convinced, having looked at it in great detail, that this is what's required, and this is a system that can work, and that is required in order to make us compliant with the 2012 regulation, and to bring to a conclusion the situation where we're the only member state that doesn't have a penalty point system.
Ireland's fishing industry has come out of Brexit a lot worse off than most of the other member states, and there doesn't seem to be the will in the Commission to be helpful to the industry. For example, last February on the Blue Deals debate, when I asked the Director General of DG Mayor, Charlene Vachiva, whether Irish boats will be entitled to regaining some of the lost quota from UK waters in her own waters, she dismissed the idea right off the bat.
Yeah, well, I suppose, listen, Brexit was a once-in-a-generation challenge, really, and threat to our fisheries sector. And, from the outset, whenever the British public voted for it, and with the advocacy of their current Prime Minister and many of their current leaders, one of the key rationales being put to them for why they should do Brexit was that, reclaim our waters and reclaim our fish. And that was, massive in the Brexit campaign, and massive in the Brexit decision, the decision it took to leave. And then was also massive in relation to its place within the negotiations between the British government and the European Commission in terms of trying to reach a withdrawal agreement, and finally a Brexit deal, the trade and cooperation agreement. And it was posed a massive threat to our national fisheries sector and the European fisheries sector throughout that 4-year process from 2016 to ended to Christmas Eve 2020, as the Brexit negotiations proceeded. And it was a massive threat to our national sector, because one third of the fish that we catch are in British waters. If in a no-deal scenario, we wouldn't have had access to that 1/3 of fish. Also, we would have had significant displacement where other EU member states that actually fleets that fish in British waters would have been displaced into the remaining British or European waters, and then particularly into our own as well. So that was the level of the threat that a no-deal Brexit and the Brexit posed. And it was why it was important to try and get a deal, and one that would protect our fisheries sector. I worked very closely and absolutely shoulder to shoulder with our fishery representatives throughout the Brexit process from my appointment, and during that crunch time, in terms of pushing very, very hard with the European Commission and with the task force, the negotiating task force, to ensure that that the fisheries mandate was stuck to as strongly as it possibly could be, and that the resolve of the EU side was as strong as any resolve that the British government were coming into the negotiations with. And I also worked closely with other EU member states throughout that process, as indeed did fishery industry representatives who worked very closely with their colleagues in other member states, representative organizations too. So there was a very strong, united approach taken by us domestically and also at European level to try and ensure that fisheries could be protected, and ultimately to try and ensure that there wouldn't be any fish as part of the fish reallocation as part of the Brexit deal, and to ensure that we could leverage fish and our vulnerable position in fish against other aspects of the trade and cooperation agreement. And that was the key thing throughout. And that's why it ended up, being, one of the final things being dealt with, because there wasn't agreement in that. Both we were holding out and refusing to give on it in the same way as the British government were. But ultimately, when it came to the crunch, there was a reallocation of fish required in order to get a deal and to get an agreement. While there was a lot less than what the British government were looking for, they were looking to take back all of the fish that the Irish fleet and the other EU fleet members catch in British waters. They wanted 100% of the fish we catch in their waters back, in a quota reallocation to them. They certainly didn't get that, but what they did get was 25% of it back to be allocated between now and 2026. So while they were looking for 100%, they got 25%. But it was 25. It was still 25% too much as far as we're concerned, because we didn't want to give away any fish. But unfortunately, the situation as it came to the crunch, we know this went right up to the very wire, and the deal didn't happen Christmas Eve. It was part of the final agreement, and that then meant that as a result of that, and the way that the various species were carved up coming out of that agreement as part of the quota reallocation, it also resulted, it put a disproportionate burden and also over other EU member states, particularly because of for example, the mackerel reallocation, where 26%, it's our most valuable fishery nationally, and 26% of that is impacted as a result of the quota, the Brexit deal. For prawns, which is by a good distance our second most valuable fishery, it was impacted to the tune of 14% between now and 2026. And then there was other impacts, some of our whitefish sector, for example, monk, megrim, hake, there was impacts there up to the tune of around 20% as well. So, and when you take all that together, because, I suppose of all the EU member states, we shared more fisheries with the British than we shared more fisheries with the British than in any other member state. And the fish species that are important to us are also important to them. So we were, it was always a challenge for us, but those reallocations in particular put a disproportionate burden, and also over other EU member states. Now, Germany they have a 15% reduction in their national quota as well, but their fishery sector would be smaller than ours, and certainly a lot smaller too compared to the overall size of their economy. other member states such as Netherlands is 10%, France 8% reduction in their national quota, Spain much more less at 4% of their national quota. So there's no doubt we've taken a disproportionate burden, and that's something that I have sought working with the industry as well since then to try and redress in every way I can. I've taken that fight to Europe to try and work to look to how we can reduce the burden that is on us, and the disproportionate burden is on us, because in advance of Brexit there had been a general sort of a principle among member states that if there was to be, why we didn't want there to be any fish part of the deal, that if there was to be, there should be equitable burden sharing among EU member states in relation to that. The nature of negotiation and the pulling and dragging that happens in negotiations ended up with a disproportionate burden on us because of the way that the species were allocated, and because particularly mackerel and prawn impacted very disproportionately on us. We have an additional burden. But that trade and cooperation agreement with Britain is now done. So that to look to how, and the best way to ensure that burden sharing would have been in the way that the various species agreements was made, so that if there was to be any give to the British government, that you would allocate the quota species to Britain in a way that would equally using species that would equally spread the burden across member states. But that's not what happened when it came to the crunch. So now we're in a situation where to looking to redress and try to balance out that burden in any way at an EU member state level. It's now among that engagement is now among EU member states as opposed to between the EU and Britain, the EU and the UK. So, and that, as we know, every member state holds fish quotas that they have precious in the same way as we hold our quotas very precious and would like to always see them increased. Other member states do take the same position as well, so it's always very challenging to get change to that. That's why since 1983, when relative stability was forced and reduced, we haven't seen any change to it, despite all the battles there's been at European level since that. There hasn't been change to relative stability. Indeed, how we fight so hard for fish is also even reflected in the Brexit negotiations. So, for example, even though the UK has pressed the nuclear button and left Europe, Brexited, and left Europe altogether, partially on the basis they wanted to reclaim their waters and reclaim their fish, even though they've done that and pressed the nuclear button, which is the biggest button that can be pushed politically within Europe to Brexit altogether. They've still only come out of that process and that negotiation with regaining 25% of the fish that the EU fleet catches in their waters. So the EU fleet post-26 will still be able to catch 75% of the fish that was caught in British waters before Brexit. So they left on the basis that they wanted to reclaim all their fish and reclaim total ownership of their waters. And what they've come out with was 25% of the fish that they wanted to reclaim, not 100%. And also there continues to be reciprocal access between EU waters and British waters as part of the deal. And we've seen the dissatisfaction and opposition there's been to the Brexit deal by fishermen in Britain since Brexit. And indeed, we've seen the British government having to move to introduce an emergency compensation package for some of their fishermen because of the fact they could no longer access the EU market the way they did before, and fish was rotting in the piers, and the implications and the result of that. So it didn't exactly work out the way that they had planned in terms of, for their fishing sector. And again, that's because we fought like tigers to try and hold on to every bit of fish we could that we catch in British waters, as did other EU member states. And that's a reflection of how hotly and hard fought fisheries is at all times. And likewise, it's hard fought in terms of all the engagements we have at EU Council level within the EU member states now post Brexit scenario. But I have worked very hard since that as well to look to see how we can reduce the burden that is on us. So, for example, in relation to the engagement that we have with Norway, the EU-Norway agreements that happen at the start of every year, I fought very hard and took a very hard line with the Commission and with other EU member states in relation to the traditional transfer that would take place for blue whiting. and emphasised absolutely the fact that we have taken a disproportionate burden out of Brexit, and that we need to find ways to redress that burden, and fought hard to get that blue-whiting transfer reduced, to try and reduce the burden on our national sector. And as a result of that, and taking that very hard line, what would normally have been a transfer in the region of 70,000 tonne per annum, it instead came down to around, I think it's 28,000 tonne is the transfer this year instead. So that was a real, a gain for our national sector, a marginal gain, but a gain nonetheless. But that's the type of battle now that I'll be fighting, and will be fighting at every opportunity, to leverage every engagement I'm having with other EU member states, to take opportunities to try and emphasise the fact that we have had a disproportionate burden, and that I want to try and find ways to address that. And then also coming into the review of the common fisheries policy, which will happen between now and the end of next year, also bring forward, front and centre, the fact that we need recognition of the disproportionate burden that we have taken. And I work very closely with fishery representatives on that, and there hasn't been one potential option presented to me that I haven't followed with full weight and full gusto and full effort to try and pursue. And that's the approach that I'll take going forward as well. Of course, alongside that, we do have to recognise the reality of the impact that Brexit is having, the fact that there is an impact on quota this year, and there will be in the years ahead. And that's why I've set up the Fisheries Task Force under the chairmanship of Aidan Cotter, and to actually advise both myself and as Minister, and for me to advise the government in relation to how we can now invest and support the fishery sector to adjust to the impact of Brexit, and to invest in this fishery sector and indeed our marine and coastal resource in the years ahead, to try and maximise its potential in terms of employment, ensure that we have a really strong, sustainable fishery sector and a really strong, healthy coastal community as well, and indeed support industry sector and employment too. Because, coming before Brexit, there had been a very clear understanding that we would need to assist the economy adjust potentially to a no-deal Brexit, and the hammer that would bring to our wider economy. Thankfully, the trade agreement that was agreed, the fact there was a Brexit deal and it wasn't a no deal, managed to mitigate lots of the dangers that were posed to other aspects of the economy, though there has been impacts. But the one sector that has been most impacted and was always most in danger from whenever Brexit was announced as something that the British people had decided upon, the one sector, unfortunately, that has had the most significant impact as a result of the trade and cooperation deal as well has been fisheries, because we haven't been able to protect it fully in the way we wanted to, and there has been an impact, I'll bet, not to the extent that would have been there under a no-deal scenario. So there's a very clear understanding, and I've kept the Cabinet updated at all times in relation to the developments here, and there's a very clear commitment from the Cabinet to invest in the sector in the time ahead to adjust to the outcome of Brexit, and to try and ensure we grow it and make the most of our fisheries resource in the years ahead, and indeed that we invest in our coastal communities and the capacity for support industries as well.
Are we fighting a losing battle with the Commission, do you think? Is it Ireland losing a battle with the Commission, do you think, or is it fisheries in general that is losing the battle with the Commission? Back in March, the North West Waters Advisory Committee Council asked the DG Mayor to address the prejudice against fishers that seems they thought is in the Commission. We had the likes of the Director General of DG Mayor just totally dismissing Ireland's case for getting extra quota and their own waters. Why do we seem to be battling with the Commission for what should be not automatically ours? Maybe it might be the wrong thing to say, but we should at least be somewhere along the line that we are able to ask for something without being knocked back straight away and then having to go in really hard and fighting for it. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying, Oliver. And listen, I mean, there's a reality here that it's always a battle when it comes to fisheries. as I pointed out, look at how we fought and battled in relation to Brexit to hold our ground and to try to hold our access to British waters, to hold our access to be able to continue to get to fish and take fish in British waters. So we battled hard for that, as did other EU member states. But likewise, within Europe, every member state really values the fisheries that they have. We massively value what we have. We always want more. We always believe we should be getting more. But there isn't another EU member state that doesn't take that view and look for more as well, and very strongly try and hold on to what they have. So listen, I mean, that's why it's important that we fight hard, and that I fight hard at European level in every engagement that I have, to defend our national sector and to try and ensure that we come out as strongly as possible and in the best manner possible. And listen, I mean, coming out of Brexit, it would be naive for us, I suppose, to expect, given how protective every member state is of its quotas, no less, no more so than ourselves, to expect others to come forward and say, well, here, have some of our fish. It'd be the first time that ever happened if it did happen. So that's why I have to battle at European level and take every opportunity I can find to try and look at ways to redress that burden that is there. I suppose if we look at it, if we were to flip it the other way around, like we've taken an impact from Brexit. If for example, other EU member states had taken a higher impact and a bigger burden than what we had taken, we wouldn't be stepping up to the mark. I wouldn't imagine saying, here guys, we feel sorry that you've taken a very high burden, have some of our fish. We wouldn't amongst us humdies. So we would be saying we're holding on to what we have because it's ours, and we have little enough of it. So that's how contested it tends to be. But there's always engagements, and there's always, it's a very elaborate and technical environment in terms of the amount of negotiations that go on throughout the year, both within the EU Commission and member states, and also with the other third countries such as Norway, such as the Faroese, such as Iceland, and also now with Britain, because they're now a third country too. And member states do have to work together in relation to going into those negotiations, and any opportunity I have for leverage and to leverage our situation coming out of Brexit to try and redress that burden, I have taken up every one of those opportunities, and I will take up every one of those opportunities going forward as well. But I suppose we are starting off with the reality coming out of Brexit of the impact that's on us, and that's one we have to now look at how we can, bit by bit, what ways we can address that.
What Irish fishermen are looking at is, these are our waters, just the same way as the Scottish and the UK fishermen have been looking at theirs and saying, this is ours, and the fish are in our waters. And we understand that there's a common fisheries policy, but the common fisheries policy is hammering us on our own fish. It's hammering us on our own grounds. The EU campaigns that relative stability is the only policy they recognise, and this is something that they hold over us. But yet, in agreeing with the UK, they have accepted zonal attachment, and we're not getting the full value of the fish in our waters, and that is not being recognised within the EU. So should Brexit mean that the idea of the common fisheries policy needs a rethink, and especially for the sake of our industry? And this brings me to a question from a young skipper from County Cork, who was very unfortunate to lose his boat to an onboard fire near Kinsale Gasfield recently. But Patrick Healy and his crew were lucky enough to escape without serious harm, but now he's boatless, and is he futureless? And this is Pat's question. I want to know, is there going to be a future for me going forward, or am I the fool to bury myself in debt to provide jobs for my crew and a living for myself? I want an industry that is supported by this government and that we can be proud of, and an industry where we are all involved. At the moment, we're a joke and second-class citizens in the government's eyes, and that makes me very sad. To say that I would have to leave a job that I love, which I've done since leaving school at a very young age, is heartbreaking. And I've worked extremely hard since then in this job to get to where I am. But what is the future for me? And no, this is a young man who's left school. He's done all his certificates. You know, he's dedicated his life, his whole career going forward to the fishing industry. Is there a future for him?
Yeah. So thanks. And listen, first of all, in relation to, it's young people like Pat that are the future of the industry. And, I know fishers feel very under pressure at the moment, and you made the point there in relation to a second-class citizen. But listen, fisheries has been a key part of what Ireland has always been about, a key part of our heritage and our tradition. And our fishers are a very, very important part of our national economy and a crucial part of our coastal communities, and and are absolutely central to everything I do on a daily basis to work with them and to try and ensure that there's a sustainable future as possible for the industry, that there's as many people as possible employed in it, and it continues to produce top quality fish in a sustainable manner, both for the domestic market and for export, and that we see people like Patrick have viable futures and incomes in it. And listen, I'll come back to that in a second. And I wanted to also just to touch on your previous point, Oliver, in relation to the unfairness, sense of unfairness coming out of Brexit, and the fact that the British have taken back ownership of their waters as such, coming out of Brexit. But like one of the key things the British government advocated during the Brexit negotiations was the idea of zonal attachment, that they wanted to catch whatever the equivalent of fish was was in their waters. They wanted that to be the size of what their quota was within the wider European Union plus British waters into the future. So basically, they wanted to resize their national quota to basically be the equivalent of what is caught in their waters, whether it's caught by the British fleet or caught by EU fleets. And as such, therefore, they wanted to reclaim 100% of the fish that EU fleet catches in their water. But coming out of Brexit, what they did was they managed to reclaim 25% of that, not 100%. So we can still now fish 75% of what we fished in British waters before. And coming out of the Brexit negotiation, the other reality is that although the British government now, their waters is their waters, they're still managed, the EU and the British waters are still managed as one. And the quotas between the EU and Britain are still managed as one. So a lot of our quotas are in, for example, Area 6A and west of Scotland. We can still fish there. We have impacts in relation to the quota, but we still go fishing in those areas and have there's reciprocal access. So basically the British fleet can fish in EU waters, EU fleet fishes and the Irish fleet fishes in British waters, which is really important to us. So while they were pushing this whole idea of zonal attachment, they certainly didn't get it. They got 25% of a reallocation of quota instead, and continued agreement for reciprocal access and management of the waters too. So that's the challenge. I mean, and that's so many would advocate that we should do the same. That we should have zonal attachment, and whatever's in our waters should be entirely caught by us. And that's sort of the same argument that the British government had been pushing for so long, and one of the reasons why they did Brexit. One of the key, emotional reasons that was presented to the British public too as to why let's do Brexit, take back our fish, take back our waters, but it didn't work out that way. There's still reciprocal access. We'll be able to catch 75% in British waters of what was there before. So, but that's a reflection of the challenges there in terms of adjusting what the situation is and the whole relative stability question, and which goes back to what various fleets were catching back in 1983. So listen, that's an argument and a debate I will take and fight in every way I can at European level and at EU Council, working with, engaging with the Commission and other EU member states. And it's something we will do. I will do my best in every way I can as part of the Common Fisheries Policy Review as well. But I suppose the one thing I'd also say coming out of Brexit is that massive threat that hung over the sector, that at least we've clarified what that threat has turned into. We didn't want to lose any fish from it at all, but there has been unfortunately a 15% impact on our quota. But that's now where we stand going forward. We'll look to see how we can improve that and battle to improve that in any way we can. But there is an adjustment and required. That's why the task force is really important, and they will advise how best to do that. But I'm determined, and the government is determined, to ensure then that going forward we have a really sustainable, strong national fisheries sector and resource and industry, and indeed that we maximise the capacity to add value to that and to have jobs in coastal communities and support industries, and indeed as well to look at how we can maximise the potential of our marine resource as well for tourism and recreation, because there's real potential there too for coastal communities, and that's untapped. But central to our coastal communities is our fishing sector, and ensuring that that is strong and sustainable, particularly for people like Pat, so that they can have certainty about what the future can hold, and that we can provide strong livelihoods for them and into the future. And I suppose there has been there's been a change here in fisheries in the same way as there has been other sectors of the economy. For example, agriculture. We've seen a resizing. Agriculture now, a lot more farmers go from being full-time, for example, to being part-time. And I've seen growing up how my family would have been full-time farmers, and all the farms around me would have been full-time farmers. And so many now, because of the way that the markets have gone, because of the capacity to produce more with machinery and with in less time, that has become more part-time in its nature, and the size of a farm that's needed, for example, to be full-time and to have a full-time income from has got much, much higher. And we've seen a similar trend in fisheries, whereby the capacity to fish now, and the boats and the science and the equipment that's available to fish is in an entirely different scale and capability to what it would have been in 1983, whenever the relative stability kicked off. So our fleet now could catch a multiple of what it catches, and is tied up for a significant periods of time, because it can catch very quickly now what it used to catch, in much smaller boats and with much less safe conditions, and with much more hardship. If I look at my local pier of Greencastle, for example, Greencastle Harbour, like that used to be a massively busy pier. Lots of small fishermen, lots of boats, massive activity. 20, 30 years ago. It's much quieter now. There's a much smaller number of vessels there now. They're larger in nature, much larger vessels. There's a much smaller number of people working in the sector, but the actual volume of fish that's being caught and going through the co-op there now is the same as what it would have been whenever that harbour was massively busy with people and small boats working in it. So there's less people working in it. There's less boats working in it. But the same amount of fish is being caught and the same amount of volume is there. But when you look at it on the surface, it's a different place, and because of the way that fleet working out of Greencastle now, and that's only one example, to catch far more, because it has the capacity, the capability, the fishing expertise, and the equipment underneath them and the tools underneath them to catch much more, but it's very much constrained by what the level of quota that's there. So listen, I suppose that's just a reflection of how we've seen things change over the years and how there's less people working in it now. But what we have to ensure is that we have a really sustainable fishery, that we maximise the employment for it, we maximise the incomes from that, and also we maximise the value of what we're catching in terms of adding value to it, doing the most we can with it, and the support industries around that too.
Speaking about Greencastle, one of the major fishing areas for fish boats and from Greencastle and that is Rockall. Has there been any developments recently on getting access for Irish boats back into the 12-mile limit around the Rock?
We're working really hard on it, Oliver, and it's obviously been a real challenge for fishers over the last number of months, particularly post-Brexit, because another implication of Brexit is that while Rockall was always within British waters and within the British zone, now post-Brexit, because of the need for mutual licensing of access to waters, it's become more challenging in terms of access, the challenge for fishermen in terms of licenses for that. The challenge here is around the 12-mile zone around Rockall and our traditional rights to fish that. We absolutely assert our traditional fishing rights to fish around Rockall. We've always fished there, and we fully believe in our entitlement to continue to fish there. There has been a different view, taken at times by the British authorities and the Scottish authorities, but we are engaging, diplomatically with them to try and come to, an agreement in relation to that. And it is really important. It's strategically really important for so many of our fishermen. That 12-mile zone, I'm fully aware of that. I've been very much engaged with the fishers around it, and I'm working closely with Minister Simon Coveney on this, because it's the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's the lead department in relation to this issue, and I know he's had engagements with his counterparts in London and Scotland on this, and it's something we are continuing to work on. And I'm aware of the urgency around this as well, given that the squid fishery that is important in May, and also the strategic importance as well in terms of our white fish sector. So we are working on it, Oliver, and we'll continue to do so.
Very good. We'll just have two more questions here for you. I know that you're pressed for time. You have to go for a meeting. The inshore sector, they feel that this Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund, they feel that that the need support from this in order to survive. What assurances can you give the inshore sector that they will get their fair share of the BAR fund, and it won't all just go to the larger vessels?
Yeah, well, listen, the BAR, the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund, is going to be really important in terms of supporting our sector to deal with the outcome of Brexit. We're fighting a battle at European level at the moment in relation to ensuring we can get the maximum amount possible of that. And then, listen, in relation to, I'll be very much guided by the task force as well in relation to its advice around this. I mean, I put it together because I want all those who have tremendous expertise and experience in our fishing sector to come together to reflect on where we're at, to reflect on the impact of Brexit, and to advise on how best to move forward. And this is one of the things that they're considering as well, and I look forward to their report, and to be very much guided by that and to considering their recommendations.
The next question from the inshore sector is that there are concerns amongst some fishermen regarding offshore wind farms and the impact they will have. We've seen Dutch fishermen complaining that they are losing valuable fishing grounds in the North Sea. And there's no doubt that Irish government is making a huge push for them. But will you and your department ensure that these wind farms will not be built on or block access to traditional fishing grounds?
I think the balance, getting the right balance, and this is really important, and accommodating traditional fishing grounds and the livelihoods of fishermen is going to be absolutely essential. There is tremendous potential offshore for the development of wind, tremendous potential for employment as well, and for creating green energy and for creating significant income for the country, not only in terms of supplying our domestic market, but also income in terms of export of energy. And the government is considering at the moment, and will be bringing forward new legislation in terms of how the planning around that can work. But it will be really important and central to that there is full consultation and engagement with fishers to ensure that everything is taken into account, and there's a really strong and appropriate balance in relation to the location of offshore energy and how it interacts with the fishing industry too, Oliver. So I agree. I think that will be really important, and it is the government is very clear on the importance of that too.
Since taking office, you have talked about having personal tax aimed at you in regards to how you go about your business and your personal integrity towards the job. Do you think that's fair?
I think, I have to say, working with the sector and representatives, there's been tremendous engagement and really strong communication and cooperation and understanding that we're all in this together and we're all working for the same objective, which is supporting our national fisheries sector and making the absolute most of it, defending it in every way we can against the challenges that's been there over the last number of months, and also trying to to develop it in the time ahead and deal with the particular challenges there at the moment. There's no, listen, I've been minister for maybe about 7 months now. And, you know, as a minister coming from Donegal, you know, which is the centre, you know, Killybegs being the centre of our one of the main centre for our national fisheries industry, and also Greencastle, a really important port nationally too. And also we have a very strong inshore sector, and you know, people that I've grown up with and gone to school with. So I have a tremendous passion and commitment to the sector. I obviously have never been a fisherman, but I have and have seen people for whose livelihoods are fishers and the fishing sector. So it's a challenging time. Like, we've had a once in a generation challenge around Brexit in particular. But listen, I'm glad to be there as a minister from Donegal, and someone who wants to do the best I possibly can with the sector and working with it. And listen, you know, that frustration, you do see it on, I know it's there with fishermen, and you see it online, and sometimes that can be directed to myself as well. And that's par for the course. But what I'd say is, listen, you know, we all have to work. My objective is the same as the fishery sector objective, and that's to do the best I possibly can by it. And I'm glad to be, as a Donegal minister, in place there too, as minister at the moment, at this very challenging time, because, you know, as a politician, you always want to be there to do the most you can, and challenging always the time is. I'm glad to be there as minister to step up to that challenge and to work with everyone in the sector to support it and do the best I possibly can, both domestically and at European level too. Listen, you'll have, you know, you'll have criticism sometimes that goes below the belt, and I'm at that point in the Donegal coastal at Town Hall as well. I just call it a couple of that, but you know, but I'm very open to being criticised anytime, and engaging in terms of issues, and you know, teasing out the things that we have to deal with to find the best way forward. So, and listen, I continue to do that, and work very, very closely with everyone in the sector, and doing that too, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's been a very interesting chat. I'm sure that we'll probably be hearing from you again, because the developments come quick, and we wish you all the best with the over the next few months.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and good luck to yourself as well. I very much enjoyed your podcast, and it's great to be able to be part of one of them with you today as well. So thank you.